I'm Greg Lightbourne with the Aviation Artifacts series on Arrowverse, the very best in aviation streaming. I'm here with Jeff Whitesell today from Plane Crazy TV, and we are doing a new video podcast series to keep all you vintage aviation fans informed about the progress that will be made on the restoration of the only Martin 404 that will be flying when it's finished, and it will be flown into Oshkosh in 2027, and that is N636 X-ray, and that plane has been in Jeff's family for many years. PlaneCrazyTV.com. You should go there and check it out. It is the official website of the 404 Foundation. And the 404 Foundation is a 501c3 company where you can help with this effort by contributing fully tax deductible donations. And whether it's $5, $10, $100 or more, it all helps toward the goal of getting this plane into Oshkosh in 2027. And it's a good time to take advantage of the 2025 tax year, get it in before January 1st, and you can deduct it from your tax bill this year. So for more on the backstory of Jeff and the Martin 404, you'll need to explore your way around PlaneCrazyTV.com website. Episode 2 of Aviation Artifacts, the series that I'm doing, is all about Jeff and tells his aviation story, or some of it, because it's an awfully big story. And it's linked on the homepage. And make sure you go to the last Martin 404 page to find out a little bit about this airplane's fascinating history. There's also a newsletter page called the Prop Wash News. And Jeff, you've got a funny story about that.
Yeah.
Why don't we just start with telling us that story?
It goes back, Greg, all the way to the Flying W, which my dad built when I was 6 years old. Basically bought a farm. It was a grass strip and a barn and a house, old farmhouse, and we turned it into an airport. And pretty soon we had a big, long runway. And not long after that, there was a shop at the north end of the airport for the general aviation airplanes. And the airline side of things had grown pretty huge. And that shop was down by our house at the south end. And I was maybe 8 years old and wanted to help, and I was always hanging around. And finally, my dad said, "Yep, go up to the north end there and see Stu, and he'll put you to work." And I'd already been sorting parts and doing things like that, but I wanted to work on the airplane. So I rode up there with great confidence on my bike, and I said to Stu Nicholson, I said, "Hey, I'm here to help." Well, what happened after that, I think, was what happens to bosses' kids when they show up at work. Stuart says to me, he hands me a bucket, and he says, "Ride down to the south end there and talk to Ralph and bring me back a bucket of prop wash." So I rode my bike down a mile away and walked in the 21 airline shop and found Ralph Pace and said, "Stuart says he needs a bucket of prop wash." And of course, I think he'd been briefed because he gave me this bucket of slop. I don't know what it was, probably came out of the loo. And I rode very carefully all the way back up to the other end and walked in with this bucket of slop, and everybody laughed, and I didn't know what was going on. And I sat it down very proudly, and Stuart said, "All right, now you need to ride back down there again because now I need 50 feet of flight line." So I rode down there, and Ralph laughed, and he gave me this gnarly old rope, and I rode back all the way, in the wind and everything, and presented the flight line, and everybody laughed again. I still didn't know what was going on, but I think I kept my composure because after that, both Stuart Nicholson and Ralph Pace were tremendous mentors to me. I learned so much from those gentlemen. Patient tutors taught me, I think, the right way to maintain an airplane. I drive everybody crazy because I pass their habits down now to those that I'm teaching and training. And I have a little bit of an unusual approach to it. And I guess you could label it prep wash.
N636X has literally been in your family for decades. Let's hear a little bit about that history. And how old were you when you first saw this airplane or first flew in the airplane?
Well, I just looked, and I was 18 years old. We had this little charter company that I'd created with my dad called professional air transport. We did it initially with a twin Bonanza, and then we had a Queen Air, and clients wanted a bigger cabin. And one day I looked in Trade a Plane, and lo and behold, here's a Martin 404, which caught my eye because my dad had told me many great stories of the Martin when he flew the Mideastern. He loves the Martin. He got his first type rating and his first captain's job in the Martin 404. And here's this Trade a Plane ad, and I read it, and it says Martin 404 with an executive interior. And I thought, well, that might work for us since we're flying executives around. So I showed the ad to Dad, and he said, let's go. And we literally went the next day. The airplane was in Houston. We walked up the aft air stairs, and it had the same effect it has on everybody today when you hit the top of the stairs. The only words that come out of your mouth are, oh, wow. And we made a deal and woke the airplane up and went and flew it. And I was totally
Uh,
enamored. I mean, it was just an amazing experience.
yeah, and it was actually in pretty good shape at that time. You didn't really need to do a big restoration on it, did you?
We went up to, I don't remember where we went. Anyway, we got landings because he wasn't current. And we jumped in the airplane the next day and flew it to North Philadelphia. I remember making 300 knots across the ground at 22,000 feet, which was really exciting for me. And a couple days later, we launched on the first trip down to Luther in the Bahamas in it. And yeah, it was ready to go. So
That's
yeah,
pretty great. And that was, I mean, that's a long time ago. And this time is going to be kind of the second full restoration that you've done on this airplane, but the third time that you'll be using the airplane in like the air show circuit or for what you used to do back then with NFL films and stuff like that, you know. I mean, it's pretty amazing the history of this airplane.
yeah. We flew the airplane a lot for NFL films, doing the Monday Night Football highlights back when they had, real film and real cameras and a lot of pressure on after the game. You had to get going. So we'd fly IFR at night and go as fast as we can back to Philly because they had to do all the cutting and editing and get the show ready, to show the next day. But unfortunately, there was a big economic downturn, and we had bought a Beech 99, which other clients wanted to go in the turboprop world, and that was the end of the line for the whole operation there. The economic downturn and the cost of that 99, we ended up shutting it all down and selling the Martin. And as you know, I bought it again, trying to remember the years, but second time around, I got to operate it for about 15 years on the airshow circuit as a traveling museum of airline history. And then, of
Yeah.
course, we had another economic downturn when I donated it to Planes of Fame. And a couple of people that know me well have asked me, your dad went broke with the airplane and you went broke with the airplane the second time around. Why are you going to do it the third time? And I'm like, well, maybe the third time is a charm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. So you also have a lot of other commitments outside of your efforts here at Valley. And the stuff you're doing at Valley is not just the Martin 404, it's also the A26 Invader. Can you tell us a little bit about the other stuff that you're doing, just so that we can better understand how often or seldom you've been able to come out and work on projects out here, which has been a critical part of determining, any kind of potential durations for the restorations?
it's been an interesting season, and I have to say that I'm the luckiest retired guy on the planet because when I retired in 2019, I really didn't know what I was going to do, and for the first time in my life, I was kind of down, which I'm not naturally that way. And my good friend Steve Hinton called me up and said, "What are you doing?" And I, said, "Oh, I'm looking for something to do, And he said, "Why don't you come work on the A26 in Valley?" And I flew over there and took a look at the airplane and very optimistic thought it would take 4 months. Well, we're 4 years into that.
Yeah.
And of course, walked right by my dear old Martin 404 sitting out there in the cold rain. It was sleeting when we got there to Valley. And we landed in Williams and drove up because the runway at Valley was covered with ice. And people think I'm nuts, but airplanes talk to me. And I walked out there and shed a tear for my old dad and the old airplane. And 638 X-ray was singing to me. She was saying, save me. And here we are. 4 years later.
I think
Um,
we I think we have a little video footage of that
Yeah,
when you first saw it. I mean,
it
I
was
think you
so
took,
cold.
yeah,
It
yeah,
was really cold.
as it does get out here sometimes.
But as you know, the radial engine world is a small community, and I had just finished taking a DC-3 across for the decks over Normandy reenactment of D-Day. And
Hmm.
word got around, and I've picked up a bunch of other projects along the way. The biggest one, of course, I'm the flight engineer on the Lewis Air Legends Lockheed Constellation, which when I
Yeah,
go to work on that airplane, it's almost always a 10-day thing. Just waking the airplane up, just servicing it, takes a day. So
yeah,
that's a wonderful and amazing and incredible experience. I'm very honored and thrilled to be involved, but a tremendous time commitment. And it, like our projects, it's in Montrose, Colorado right now. Whenever we go and do anything on any of these airplanes, you have to get all the logistics in place. You have to get the tools and the oil and the siphons and the pumps. And if you don't, then your volunteers are standing around twiddling their thumbs. And my greatest fear is that, I'll have a volunteer that gets back in his car after a session with us and says, well, that was a waste of time. I don't
yeah.
ever want to have that happen. So
Hmm.
just the planning and logistics ahead of one of the visits takes a lot of time. So it's been, I haven't been bored, not one day.
No,
So
no, and it's a funny thing because I've noticed lately, I mean, I know your history, and I know you, were a big part of restoring and helping to get Miss Montana over to Normandy, and also the story of the Wally bird, which is on the Rescues from Oblivion page on the website.
yeah,
And, so there's that, and then there's, those planes, and then the constellation. But and I don't know if it's the algorithm throwing this at me because of my interests, or whether it's something that is really starting to kind of take hold. Is I see these beautifully restored airliners, prop liners from the 50s and 40s and 30s sometimes, with the radial engines, and it is becoming more and more popular. People really want to see these planes in the air. And the really cool thing is that the Martin 404 will be the only one, and
very likely.
you see,
And it might even be the very only flyable Martin at all. There are hardly
yeah,
any Martin airplanes out there, which is amazing to me because Glenn Martin at the beginning of World War II was the largest aircraft manufacturer in the world. A little known
yeah,
fact. And now the name is swallowed up. They ended up part of Lockheed Martin and hardly recognized at all. One of the things I love
right.
to say about Glenn Martin is he taught Bill Boeing how to fly. Did you know
Oh,
that?
really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
The
I
very
think you
first
mentioned that. Yeah.
the very first ever Boeing airplane was a copy that Bill Boeing built, and it was a copy of a Martin design.
No,
To
that's
give
pretty
you how
amazing.
far back the history goes. Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
and as you said, when you see folks at the air show and they see these airplanes and they hear the engines, the sound is a beautiful thing. It motivates them. It's a very wonderful magic kind of thing.
Hmm.
Uh, just yesterday, I was at Chino and they got the Corsair out and started it up and taxied it around, and people were standing there in awe at the sound of it. It just was a
Yeah.
beautiful thing.
Well, it's
So yeah,
like
it's
anytime that Larry does a run up of his T6 out here, I just have to be out there because I love
yep.
the sound of it. I love everything about it. I mean, that's a pretty big radial in that little airplane.
I'm very sorry that we've made you an addict.
Yeah.
We've
Addict,
corrupted you.
addicted to the
Yeah.
sound of radios. Well, actually, I spent many years in out in British Columbia working on the water, and just every day you would hear the sound of the radials of those
Yep.
beavers, flying around, and they're still today still using the R985. It's pretty amazing that that engine has been, the last one came off the production line in 1953, and they're still using them in so
Oh
many
yeah.
airplanes. It's a pretty amazing.
I'm very fond of that engine, and I can tell you when I flew the Beaver, it's amazing to me that engine. I proved it. That engine will run underwater.
Yeah, yeah,
I've had that much water coming up off the bow on a rough landing, and the engine just keeps going. It's amazing.
yeah, yeah. You did your time flying float planes out on the West Coast, didn't you?
Yep, yep. Wonderful
Hmm.
time there with Kenmore Air Harbor.
Yeah, and it's
Amazing.
funny that I had just made a comment on a random post on Instagram the other day, and you know, there was some conversation going back and forth about the reliability of the R985, and it had shown a beaver that had, you know, blown a cylinder, and the pilot was able to land safely
Yep.
even with a cylinder gone, and it turns out that, you know, I had mentioned your name, and the guy is like, "Yeah, I knew Jeff really well. We were roommates, and we flew for Kenmore." And
Yes,
so, I mean, that it's amazing how small the aviation world really is, you know.
it had to
So,
be Cactus Jack, as I call him, which
yeah,
is a joke. He's from Canada. He wouldn't know a cactus if he tripped over it. He's from Canada, but that's okay.
he says that he wants to come down here sometime when you're working on the 404, and I believe that he probably will.
He's one of the few people who tells more stories than me. He's had more jobs. He is the ultimate mercenary in the field. He's had more diverse, interesting, crazy jobs. He's had an amazing career. So yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah,
Come on down,
we should
Jack.
maybe we should have him on the podcast one time. That would be kind of neat.
You're going to
So,
need extra time.
we can make it as long as we want. So, with the Martin 404 now, can you just talk a little bit about where you're at in the restoration, and and if you can put it into necessary steps to completion, what needs to be done before the date of Oshkosh in 2027? I mean, is it
Well,
20 months? It might only be
yeah,
18 months.
not even. Yeah, even before that, I want to fly it on my 75th birthday. That's June
Right,
4th. So
right.
that would be pretty cool. The thing about it is, when you start a project like this, it's not for the meek. I tell people there's three ways to fail with an operation like this. You can be undermanned, you can be underplanned, and you can be underfunded. And this time around, I'm making sure that we're not any of those. We've got a really great team of volunteers. We've got a good plan. It's a workable plan. And so far, we've been okay on the funding. That's something I'm watching very closely. We have both engines off the airplane. They are up being overhauled by the best overhaul shop in the land, courtesy of Mr. Ray Anderson. Nobody does it better. Yeah, that's a plug for Ray right out front.
That's
Those engines are going to be back probably in March and April next year, and we'll be building up the next step, which is what we call the QEC, where we mate the engines to the engine mount and all the harnesses, and then we put the starters and the generators and tachometer generators and vacuum pumps and fuel pumps, and all that has to be installed. And we'll do all that separate away from the airframe. We've really got two projects going because the engines and the QECs are one thing, and then the airframe itself is a totally separate operation. We've got to pull the wings off for a recurring inspection. That's a big job. So that's the next big thing on the airframe. So to answer your question, there's really, the way I do this is two separate paths that we're on right now. There's firewall forward, which is the engines, propellers, and components and all that. And after the firewall is the airframe stuff. We're going to pull the landing gear out and overhaul that completely. We got really lucky. We got the remnants of the two airplanes that were broken up in Graybull, Wyoming. We got a tremendous amount of components from those, which we'll be able to overhaul, and that'll speed the process of building up the landing gear and brakes, the wheels and tires and all that. So to answer your question, where are we? We're 25% into it with about 90% to go.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, there's
yeah,
been a lot of excitement among everybody about the fact that the engines are off
yeah,
and that they're where they need to be restored, overhauled, and you know, everybody was. I remember the last time that everybody was here, everybody was like, "Well, the next thing will be putting them back on, and that's going to be
yeah.
the really
Well,
fun part," you know.
we're a ways from that. Well, the thing about it, it takes again, it takes a lot of organizing and a lot of equipment and a lot of planning. When we come over to take the wings off, it sounds simple, but we're going to need cranes and lifts and hoists and jigs to put the wings in. And once we get them off, then they're going to be inspected. The old way was with X-ray, so we would have an X-ray guy come, but I'm getting approval to do it with alternate means now with ultrasound. But still, we have to schedule that and we have to make sure all the logistics are in place so that he can do his job. So to answer your first question, you know, what stage are we in? We're still in the very beginning. I don't really get excited until we turn the corner, as I call it. That's what I call tinker toy time, when all the stuff comes back, it's all overhauled, it's all ready, it's all new and shiny and records and inspected and everything. Then you start putting stuff back together, and that's really fun. That's when I get excited. And we're
Hmm.
not there yet. We're quite a ways from that. That's going to
Ways
be a
from
year.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be a year um,
Yeah.
before we start really putting stuff back together. We haven't even really started. We got to pull all the instruments out and overhaul all those, and of course, all transmitters and everything for the instruments. So that's all got to be done. So yeah, got a ways to go.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's exciting. I mean, everybody that works on the plane loves the whole idea of it
Yeah,
going back together as, a flying. That is also probably one of the best points in the restoration of these old planes is when you get it outside and you start doing run ups and you start doing, testing and taxiing and all that
oh
kind of
yeah,
stuff. That's gonna be a
yeah.
lot of fun and very exciting. Yeah, so that's great. And can you say a little bit about what's happening with the A26? I mean, the A26 has been a not an easy project.
One of the problems has been on again, off again. We tried to get ready for a couple of air shows that we wanted to take it to, and we kept having hydraulic problems, and we're still having hydraulic problems. The airplane had some things done to it when it was it was a firefighter for a while, and they maintained the airplane, but then it became an airplane that dropped ash and dirt on glaciers up in Alaska. And I think there were some modifications done to it, makes it kind of outside of all the manuals on the airplane. And I'm pretty sure this is where these hydraulic mysteries are coming from. And as we work through it, we'll solve them, but it just takes time.
Yeah.
I joke about that airplane that we're 95% complete and 95% to go. It's and again, the biggest problem for me on the airplane is it wasn't built to last. It was built, to maybe last 25 missions. I say they didn't really build it with the maintenance people in mind. It's hard to maintain. It's hard to get access. Everything on it is difficult. One of the fun things I do with the volunteers is after we've slaved on the A26 all day long, I say, okay, come on over and let's work on the Martin for an hour. And all of them are delighted because you're not bumping your head and bumping your shoulders. And,
Yeah.
we joke about the engineers there at Douglas, and they made all the access panels so small that you can just barely get one hand in there. Where you work on the Martin, and all the cowling comes off, and you can climb inside the nacelle. So it's just a totally different philosophy. The Martin was built to last for 50 years. They wanted,
Hmm.
they made it very, very maintainable. Sort of a totally different mission.
Yeah.
We'll get it. We'll get it. We're just not there yet.
Yeah, I know. And we've been so close so many times. And then something else happens with the hydraulics that,
Yeah.
but these are the kind of things that you have to do right. As you
Well,
said before, it's not just making the airplane go, but it's also making sure that you can stop the airplane.
and that's, yes, that. And other airplanes that I've worked on, I learned that the hard way. It's very easy to focus on making the engine run and making the avionics work and all the flight controls and everything. And got to pay attention to stopping the airplane too. Because
Yeah.
if you don't,
Yeah.
you'll have an exciting arrival. I'm thinking of a certain Convair that's sitting right outside your door there. And I can
Yeah.
tell that story on the next podcast.
So yeah, for some of our upcoming podcasts, there's a few different topics that would be really fascinating for people. We definitely will have one about corrosion corner and and the importance of flight instruction as related to filling out the quote unquote cursed columns.
Yes, you've heard me talk about those.
And then there's another thing that's kind of dear to your heart, the history of airliners and its importance. And that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier on in this talk, that it seems that there has been more interest lately in the restoration of these really beautiful airliners, and then another one would be the importance of using simulators in flight instruction. And those all of those three things kind of get to one thing that's been very important to you over the years is flight instruction. And your father was a flight instructor
Yeah.
and you're a flight instructor. And can tell me a little bit about how important that is for you and has been over the years.
Well, I'll sound a bit like a kook. I believe that in God's eyes, we only rise when we lift others. And I can only think of, a couple ways to do that. And I think the best way is to offer them flight. I've been lucky to be a flight instructor for two major universities. I was a flight instructor for two major airlines. Taught in primary trainers at Ohio State and at Embry-Riddle. Taught in the simulators and in the airplanes at the airlines. And to me, it's important. It's a very important job because safety is the paramount consideration. But the reward, it's so much like other teaching jobs. The hours are tough and the amount of effort you put into it, you don't get a lot of feedback from the companies. There are those days when a student comes up to you and is truly thankful and super excited, and maybe you see that student a couple days later, a couple months later, and you realize that you had a hand in changing their lives. And that's the sweet spot for me. It's been consistent my whole career. I've never stopped teaching, and still to this day, I walk away and I just had a student in the Twin Bonanza that I rescued. The airplane broke down at the Santa Maria Air Show, and all I did was give them a ride back, and they were so excited. And then when I walked away, I thought, because I didn't just give them a ride in the Twin Bonanza. Student pilot, I put her in the left seat and made her fly it, and she was absolutely beside herself with glee. That's what it's about. Lord knows the flight instructing job, especially in the lower ranks, you can't make any money. It's tough. So you have to, if you're going to be a flight instructor, then by God, be a passionate flight instructor and pour yourself into it. I guarantee you'll get the rewards back with the human experience. And, don't worry about the money, it'll come later. But that's why I flight instruct, because of what it does to folks. It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and that kind of goes hand in hand with your whole philosophy and attitude toward helping, especially helping the younger volunteers that show an interest in this vintage aviation stuff. I mean, I've seen it several times here with young people that work with you and how they just light up, because they start out and they're wondering, what is this? And then at one point they realize that they have this opportunity that nobody else,
Yeah.
very rarely people ever get an opportunity to do that, no matter what age. But I mean, these people they light up when they realize how rare this opportunity is for them,
Well,
especially
I
in these areas.
get a lot of questions. Why do we pour all this money into these old airplanes? And preserving the history is important. Honoring those who served, both in the military and in the airline industry. I'll go on my soapbox here a little bit for my fellow airline employee. The airlines were built not by Wall Street, not by management, not by the union. They all had their part. The airlines that we have today that we take for granted of were built by the employees. It was our sensitivity, it was our esprit de corps, it was our sense of humor, it was our innovations. A lot of the things that we take for granted now came up from the folks out there out on the line doing the job, flying the airplanes, and coming up with, hey, we can do it better by, doing it this way. And as long as I'm drawing breath, I'll restore the airliners to pay tribute to them. But it's not just that. If I take one of these airplanes, any of the airplanes, the fighters that we work with down at Chino, and if there's one kid out there in the audience that looks at that and it turns his head and he turns away from drugs or turns away from crime or decides to become more organized and disciplined to pursue a career in aviation, well, then we've done our job. I think that we can probably reach a lot more than just one kid. That's really what it's about. Yeah, the airplanes are wonderful, and there's nothing like the sound of that radial engine. But I love when I'm at an air show, when I get away from whatever airplane I'm involved with, I take my badge off of my shirt and my hat so nobody knows who I am. I'll sit down in the crowd and I just listen to people. And they ooh and they ah and they get excited, and
Oh yeah.
that's what it's about. So yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's good. I think that's about it for this podcast, and we'll be back soon with another one.
Pretty soon we're going to talk about simulators. Have I got a surprise for you?